The August heat made the air shimmer like broken glass. Clara had been traveling for 6 days, 3 trains, 2 coaches, and 1 freight wagon that smelled like wet cattle. Her leg ached in that deep, grinding way that meant weather was coming, though the sky showed nothing but pale blue brutality. She'd memorized the letter during those endless miles, every word of Samuel Brennan's careful script promising her a home, a partnership, a fresh start in Salvation Creek, Arizona territory. The train lurched to a stop with a shriek of brakes that made her teeth hurt. Through the dusty window she could see the station, if you could call it that, more like a wooden platform with a roof that looked one strong wind away from giving up entirely. A few buildings clustered nearby, sun-bleached and stubborn. Beyond them, nothing but red dirt and scrub brush stretching toward mountains that looked like they'd been cut from rust-colored paper. Salvation Creek, the conductor announced, not bothering to hide his doubt that anyone would choose to get off here. Clara gathered her 2 cases, one with clothes, one with books, and made her way down the aisle. She felt the other passenger's eyes on her, tracking the way her left leg dragged slightly, the way she had to grip the seat backs for balance. She'd stopped caring about those looks somewhere around Kansas City, mostly. The step down from the train was higher than she'd expected. She took it carefully, using her good leg first, then bringing the bad one down with a thump that sent a spike of pain up her hip. The platform boards were warped, uneven. She steadied herself and looked around. A man stood about 20 feet away, apart from the handful of locals who'd come to collect freight. He wore a clean shirt and a new hat, and he was holding a piece of paper, her letter, she assumed. Their eyes met. He took a step forward, then his gaze dropped to her leg. It wasn't a quick glance. He stared at the way she stood. Weight shifted to her right side, the way her skirt hung different on the left, where the muscle had never fully recovered from the fever that had nearly killed her at 15. His face didn't change expression exactly. It just closed, like shutters slamming over windows. Clara felt something cold slide down her spine despite the heat. "Mr. Brennan?" He didn't answer. Instead, he folded the letter, her letter, with all her careful honesty about her past and her hopes, and put it in his pocket. Then he turned and walked to a horse tied at the edge of the platform. He mounted up smooth and easy, like a man who'd done it 10,000 times. "Wait," Clara said, taking a limping step forward. "Mr. Brennan, please." He touched his hat brim in a gesture that might have been politeness if it hadn't been so completely empty. Then he clicked his tongue at the horse and rode away. Just like that. Down the dusty street between those sun-bleached buildings and out of sight. Clara stood there, holding her cases, aware of the station master pretending not to watch, of the other passengers filing past her, of the train already huffing and preparing to leave. The conductor gave her a look that was equal parts pity and impatience. "Miss, you getting back on or not? We're pulling out." She turned to stare at the train, at the open door and the dark interior that smelled like sweat and coal smoke. She had maybe $8 left to her name. Enough for food for a few days, maybe. Not enough for a ticket back east. Not enough for anything except postponing the inevitable. "Miss?" "No," Clara heard herself say. "I'm staying." The conductor shrugged like it was no concern of his if she wanted to strand herself in hell. "Suit yourself." The train pulled away with a grinding screech, leaving her in a cloud of steam and cinders. When it cleared, she could see the town properly. Salvation Creek wasn't much. Maybe 24 buildings clustered around a main street that looked like it had been drawn with a ruler and then beaten with hammers until it gave up on being straight. A general store. A saloon. What might have been a doctor's office or a land agent or both. A few houses scattered beyond the main strip, most of them looking like they were in arguments with gravity that they were slowly losing. And people. They'd come out to watch the spectacle. A woman alone, clearly not meeting anyone, standing on the platform like she had any right to be there. Clara recognized the look in their eyes. She'd seen it 100 times back in Philadelphia. That particular mix of curiosity and judgment that people wore when they encountered something that didn't fit into their neat categories. A woman emerged from what looked like a boarding house. 2 stories. White paint peeling like sunburned skin. She was maybe 50, built like a flour sack, wearing an apron that had seen better decades. She came halfway across the street and stopped, hands on her hips. "You the mail-order bride Samuel Brennan sent for?" Clara's throat was so dry she had to swallow twice before she could speak. I suppose I was. He didn't take you. It wasn't a question. No, ma'am, he did not. The woman's mouth twisted into something that wasn't quite a smile. Can't say I'm surprised. Samuel's particular. You got money for a room? Some. How much is some? Clara didn't see any point in lying. $8. A few of the watching townspeople laughed. Not cruel laughter, exactly. More like the kind of laugh people make when they see someone else confirming what they already knew about how the world works. That'll get you 3 nights and meals, the boarding house woman said. After that, you'll need to work it off or move along. I'm Ruth Carpenter. You got a name? Clara Whitmore? Well, Clara Whitmore, you look like you're about to fall over. Get inside before you give yourself heat stroke on top of everything else. It wasn't kindness in Ruth's voice, not exactly. More like the brisk efficiency of someone dealing with a problem that had landed uninvited on her doorstep. But it was more than anyone else was offering, so Clara picked up her cases and followed. The boarding house interior was dim and only slightly cooler than outside. A narrow staircase led to the second floor. A doorway on the right showed a dining room with a long table. Everything smelled like lye soap and old coffee. Room 3, top of the stairs on the left, Ruth said. Supper's at 6. You're late. You don't eat. Breakfast is 6 in the morning. Water's out back. Pump's temperamental, so you'll need to work for it. Necessary's the small building behind that. Any questions? Clara had about 1,000 questions, starting with what she was supposed to do when her $8 ran out and ending with whether Samuel Brennan was the kind of man who made a habit of summoning women across half the country just to humiliate them. But she was so tired her bones felt like they were made of sand, and her leg was screaming, and she could feel tears trying to push their way out. No, ma'am, she managed. Good. Get yourself settled. You look like death walked over. Clara climbed the stairs one step at a time, cases banging against her shins. Room 3 was barely bigger than a closet. A narrow bed, a washstand, a hook on the wall for hanging clothes. One small window looked out over the main street. She could see the platform where she'd been standing 10 minutes ago, still empty, still shimmering in the heat. She set her cases down and sat on the bed, which creaked like it was offended by her weight. Then, finally, she let herself feel the full weight of what had just happened. She'd left Philadelphia with her aunt's voice ringing in her ears. You're being a fool, Clara, a desperate, crippled fool. Men don't want wives they have to take care of. She'd ignored that voice because Samuel Brennan's letters had sounded different, thoughtful, kind. He'd written about needing a partner, not a decoration, about building something that mattered more than appearances. She'd believed him. She'd used the last of her savings to make this trip. She'd told herself that honesty was better than deception, so she'd written about her leg, about the fever, about the fact that she couldn't dance or run or do half the things other women did without thinking. He'd written back saying it didn't matter, that he needed someone strong in different ways. She'd believed that too. Clara pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes until she saw stars. She would not cry. Crying solved nothing. She'd learned that at 15 when the fever broke and left her leg twisted and weak, when her mother had looked at her like a broken dish that couldn't be glued back together properly. A knock on the door made her jump. Yes? It's Ruth. Let me in. Clara opened the door. Ruth stood there holding a pitcher of water and a tin cup. She pushed past Clara and set them on the washstand. Drink, she ordered. You're gray as old dishwater. Clara drank. The water was warm but clean, and it helped settle something in her chest. Ruth crossed her arms and studied her with eyes that didn't miss much. You planning to go back east? Can't afford the ticket. You got people there? An aunt. She made it clear I was a burden. I don't intend to prove her right by crawling back. Ruth made a sound that might have been approval or disgust. Samuel Brennan's a coward. Spreads around his money like he's got breeding, but he's got the spine of a stepped-on worm. His father owned half the county before the drought took him. Samuel inherited a good ranch and pissed away most of it trying to pretend he's quality. Town puts up with him because he pays his debts, mostly. Clara sat back down on the bed, too tired to stand. Why send for me at all? Same reason men do most stupid things. He thought it sounded good until it showed up on his doorstep looking real. Ruth paused, then added with brutal honesty, He wanted a wife who'd make him look respectable. You don't look respectable. You look like hard work. The words should have hurt. Maybe they did. Clara couldn't tell anymore. Everything hurt. What do people do here? Clara asked. For work, I mean. For women. Ruth snorted. Same as anywhere. Cooking, cleaning, sewing, teaching if you got letters. Whoring if you're desperate and stupid. The saloon's got girls, but I wouldn't recommend it. The general store might need help, but Carter's got 3 daughters, and he uses them for free labor. There's a few ranches that need cooks sometimes, but most of them are barely hanging on. Drought's been bad for 2 years running. Clara looked down at her hands. They were good hands, strong despite everything. She could sew, she could cook, she could read and write and do figures. She'd kept her aunt's house running for 5 years while her aunt complained about every meal and every mended sheet. I'll figure something out, she said, though she had no idea if that was true. Ruth gave her a look that was uncomfortably sharp. You got grit or you got pride? Because grit I respect. Pride'll get you killed out here. I don't know, Clara admitted. Maybe both. Well, Ruth moved toward the door. Supper's in 2 hours. Come down or don't, but you already paid for it, so you might as well eat. And Clara? She paused in the doorway. Don't let the town see you cry. They smell weakness, like dogs smell fear, and they'll tear you apart just as quick. Then she was gone, footsteps heavy on the stairs. Clara sat in the dim room and listened to the sounds of Salvation Creek, settling into evening. Voices from the street, a horse whinnying, someone hammering something, the sound echoing flat and lonely across the desert. She thought about Samuel Brennan riding away. She thought about her aunt's face when she'd said goodbye, that mix of satisfaction and vindication. She thought about the $8 that was all that stood between her and complete destitution. Then she stood up, smoothed her skirt, and started unpacking her cases. If she only had 3 days in this room, she'd make them count. She'd find work somehow. She'd find a way to stay. Because going back wasn't an option, and giving up felt too much like proving everyone right. Supper in Ruth's boarding house was a quiet affair. 5 people total around the long table. Clara, Ruth, 2 men who looked like ranch hands and smelled like horses, and an older man with a magnificent white beard who Ruth introduced as Judge Morrison, retired. The food was simple but good. Beans, cornbread, salt pork. Clara ate slowly, aware of the men stealing glances at her. The ranch hands lost interest quickly. She clearly wasn't the kind of woman they were curious about. But Judge Morrison studied her with eyes that were still sharp despite his age. Ruth tells me Samuel Brennan left you standing, he said finally, his voice carrying the careful diction of someone educated back east. That true? Clara swallowed her mouthful of beans. Yes, sir. You sign any papers, marriage contract, anything binding? No, sir, just letters. Promises and letters aren't worth the paper they're written on out here, the judge said. You could make noise about breach of contract, but you'd need money for a lawyer and proof of damages. You got either? No, sir. Didn't think so. He sopped up bean juice with his cornbread. What are you planning to do? It was the question everyone wanted answered, including Clara herself. Find work, stay if I can. One of the ranch hands, younger, with sunburned ears, laughed into his coffee. Doing what? Ain't exactly a lot of call for... He trailed off, apparently thinking better of finishing that sentence. For what? Clara asked, voice level. The ranch hand's ears got redder. Just saying, work's scarce for everybody. Drought's got most ranches barely hanging on. Town's hardly growing. Lots of folks leaving, not many coming. Except fools, the other ranch hand added helpfully. And you'd know about that, wouldn't you, Carl? Ruth said sharply. Seeing as you came here 5 years ago looking for gold that didn't exist. Carl shut his mouth and focused on his plate. Judge Morrison was still watching Clara. You're educated. I can hear it in your voice. My father was a school teacher before he died. My mother taught piano. I can read, write, do figures. I can sew and cook. I can keep books. Can you shoot? The question surprised her. No, sir. Ride? I never learned. Handle livestock? No. The judge sat back. Then you're limited to indoor work, and there's precious little of that. Ruth's the only one running a boarding house. The saloon's got all the girls it needs. General store's a family business. Doctor's office doesn't need help. Doc Hartley barely makes enough to keep himself fed. There must be something, Clara said, hearing the edge of desperation in her own voice and hating it. What there is, the judge said slowly, is a lot of men who will offer you room and board in exchange for services I suspect you're not interested in providing. And before you get high-minded about it, some women take those deals because it's better than starving. Out here, pride's a luxury. Clara set down her fork. Her appetite had vanished. I understand. Do you? The judge leaned forward. I don't think you do. This isn't Philadelphia or Boston or wherever you came from. We're barely civilized here. The law reaches about as far as I can spit, and I'm an old man. Justice is mostly what people agree it is on any given day. A woman alone with no money and no prospects? He shook his head. That's a dangerous thing to be. Then I'll be dangerous back, Clara said. The table went quiet. Even Ruth looked surprised. The judge's eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. Then, slowly, he smiled. Well, maybe you got a chance after all. Small chance, but a chance. What would you do? Clara asked him directly. If you were me, what would you do? He considered this. I'd find someone who needed help bad enough that they'd overlook your limitations. Someone desperate. And I'd make myself so useful they couldn't afford to send me away. He paused. Of course, people that desperate are usually desperate for good reason. You might be trading one bad situation for another. But I'd be trading, Clara said, not just accepting. True enough. The judge returned to his meal. Good luck, Miss Whitmore. You're going to need it. The rest of supper passed in silence. Clara helped Ruth clear the plates. The older woman didn't ask, but she didn't refuse the help either. By the time the kitchen was clean, full dark had fallen outside. Through the window, Clara could see lights in some of the buildings. The saloon glowed warmest, music and laughter spilling into the street. You need anything else? You know where my room is, Ruth said. First door at the bottom of the stairs. Don't knock unless something's on fire or someone's dying. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. 3 days, remember? After that, you're on your own. Clara climbed back to room 3 and lit the small oil lamp on the washstand. In its flickering light, she unpacked her books. 7 of them, carefully chosen. Poetry. A novel. A book about medicinal herbs her mother had owned. A Bible she'd brought because it seemed like something people expected, even though she hadn't opened it in years. A journal, half filled with her own writing. A book about agriculture that had been her father's. And one about mathematics that she'd bought herself because numbers made sense in a way people didn't. She opened the journal and wrote, Day 1, Salvation Creek, Arizona Territory. Samuel Brennan did not want me. The town does not want me. I have $8 in 3 days. I need to find work. I need to become indispensable to someone, somewhere. I need to not go home in defeat. I will not go home in defeat. She closed the journal and lay down on the narrow bed, still fully dressed. Through the thin walls, she could hear one of the ranch hands snoring. Somewhere distant, a coyote yipped. The wind rattled the window in its frame. Clara stared at the ceiling and made herself a promise. 3 days to find something, anything. If she couldn't make herself useful to this town, she'd walk into the desert and find somewhere else. Another ranch, another settlement, another chance. Because Ruth was right about one thing, pride was a luxury. But giving up was a death sentence, and Clara Whitmore wasn't ready to die. Well, morning came early and loud. Someone was hammering something right outside, a sound like the world's worst clock. Clara's leg had stiffened overnight the way it always did, and getting out of bed felt like forcing a rusted gate open. She dressed carefully, chose her sturdiest skirt and plainest shirt, and tied her hair back in a way that said worker instead of lady. Breakfast was biscuits and gravy, bitter coffee, and silence. The ranch hands had already left. Judge Morrison sat reading a week-old newspaper. Ruth moved through the kitchen like a small, efficient storm. Clara ate quickly and helped clear again. When Ruth didn't object, she washed the dishes too. It wasn't much, but it was something. You trying to work off your room already? Ruth asked. Trying to be useful. Useful? Ruth dried a plate with more force than necessary. You know what's useful? Not making more work for people. You want to help? Go into town and see if anyone needs anything. Check the general store board. People pin up notices sometimes. And for God's sake, don't mention Samuel Brennan. It'll just get you pitied, and pity's worse than nothing. Clara hung up the dish towel. Yes, ma'am. And Clara? Ruth turned to look at her straight on. If someone offers you work that sounds too good, it probably is. Trust your gut. It's smarter than your hope. The morning sun was already hot when Clara stepped outside. Salvation Creek looked even smaller in daylight, basically one street with delusions of being a town. She walked slowly, favoring her good leg, and tried to look purposeful instead of desperate. The general store was bigger than it looked from outside. Shelves packed with goods, barrels of flour and beans, tools hanging from hooks, fabric and bolts, a whole wall of sundries. A man behind the counter, Carter, Clara assumed, watched her enter with the careful neutrality of someone who'd already heard the gossip. Help you? I'm looking for work, Clara said simply. I can sew, cook, clean, keep books. I'm good with figures. Carter scratched his chin. Got 3 daughters who do all that for free. Sorry. Is there anyone in town who might need help? You the girl Samuel Brennan left standing? Clara's jaw tightened. Yes. Thought so. Look, Miss Clara Whitmore. Miss Whitmore, I'll be straight with you because that's kinder than letting you waste time. Nobody's hiring. Drought's got everyone pinching pennies until they scream. The folks who do have money got family to do the work. And the folks without money, he shrugged. Well, they can't afford to pay anyone. There must be someone, Clara said. Someone who needs help desperately. Carter thought about this. There's old widow Hendricks. She's half blind and mean as a snake. Might need someone to read to her or help around her place, but she's got no money, and she'd probably make your life hell. Anyone else? A couple of the ranches further out are barely hanging on, but they're far, half a day's ride or more. And most of them are barely feeding the folks they got. Clara felt something heavy settling in her chest. Is there a job board? Over there. Carter pointed to a wall near the door. Clara walked over. The board was mostly empty. A notice about a lost horse from 3 months ago. An advertisement for seed that was out of date. A handwritten card that said, looking for ranch hands, must know cattle, must have horse. Hale Ranch. Hale Ranch, Clara said. Is that nearby? Carter made a face. Define nearby. It's about 8 miles northwest, up in the Badlands. Ethan Hale runs it, or tries to. His father built that place 30 years ago when water was plentiful. Now it's barely viable. Ethan's trying to hold on, but he shrugged. Drought's hitting him hard. Last I heard, he'd let his hands go. Can't afford to pay them. How do I get there? You can't. Not without a horse, and I doubt you can ride. And even if you could, Ethan's not looking for... Carter gestured vaguely at her. For someone like you. He needs ranch hands. People who can rope cattle, fix fences, handle the work. I'm stronger than I look, Clara said. Maybe. But that's a hard 8 miles in this heat. And that's assuming you don't get lost or bitten by a rattler. I'd advise against it. Clara looked at the notice again. The handwriting was cramped but clear. Looking for ranch hands. It didn't say no women. It didn't say must be able to walk properly. It just said he was looking. That was something. Thank you for your time, Clara said. Carter nodded, already turning to help another customer who'd come in. Clara stepped back outside into the beating sun. 8 miles. Northwest. Badlands. She thought about her $8. About Ruth's boarding house. About 3 days, and then nothing. She thought about going back east with her tail between her legs, about her aunt's smug face, about spending the rest of her life being someone's burden. Then she thought about Judge Morrison's words. Find someone desperate enough. A ranch barely hanging on, far from town, owner trying to do it alone. That sounded pretty desperate. Clara walked back to the boarding house and packed her smaller case with practical things. A change of clothes, the herb book, the journal, matches, the small amount of food she'd tucked away. She left the rest of her belongings in room 3. If this didn't work, she'd be back for them in a day or two. If it did work, well, she'd figure that out when the time came. Ruth was sweeping the front steps. Going somewhere? Hale Ranch. It's about 8 miles. I know where it is. You planning to walk there? Yes. Ruth stopped sweeping and stared at her. With that leg? In this heat? Are you stupid or suicidal? Probably both, Clara admitted, but I'm going anyway. Why? Because Carter said Ethan Hale is desperate for help. Because desperate people make deals they wouldn't normally make. And because sitting here waiting for something better isn't going to work. Ruth was quiet for a long moment. Then she went inside and came back with a canteen and a cloth-wrapped bundle. Water, bread and dried meat. If you leave now, you might make it before you collapse from heat stroke. Go northwest toward the Red Rocks. There's an old cattle trail that'll take you most of the way. Watch for snakes. Clara took the offerings, throat tight. Thank you. Don't thank me. If you die out there, I'll still have to deal with your belongings. But Ruth's eyes were softer than her words. And Clara, if it doesn't work out, if Hale sends you away or you can't make it, come back. I'll figure something out, 3 days or not. Clara nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Then she started walking. The first mile wasn't bad. The trail was visible. The sun wasn't quite at its peak yet. Clara found a rhythm. 3 steps with her good leg bearing most of the weight, shift, step with the bad leg, repeat. Her case wasn't heavy, but it got heavier. The second mile, the heat started to sink in. Real heat, the kind that made her dizzy. She drank from the canteen sparingly. The third mile, she realized this might have been a mistake. The Badlands rose around her. Red rock formations twisted into strange shapes, gullies cut deep by ancient water that hadn't run in years. The trail got rougher. The fourth mile, her legs started to scream, not just ache, actual screaming pain that made her vision blur. She stopped to rest in the shade of a rock overhang, ate some of Ruth's bread, forced herself to keep going. The fifth mile, she considered turning back. But turning back meant 5 miles in the heat she'd already barely survived. Forward or back, she had to go 3 more miles. Might as well be forward. The 6th mile, she fell. Tripped on a rock, went down hard on her bad side. The case flew open, scattering clothes. She lay there for a moment, tasting blood from where she'd bitten her tongue, and wondered if this was how it ended. Vultures were already circling overhead. She'd been seeing them for the past hour. Get up, she told herself. Get up or die here. Those are the choices. She got up, repacked the case with shaking hands, kept walking. The 7th mile, she started to see things. Her mother, standing in the shade of a rock, shaking her head in disappointment. Samuel Brennan on his horse, riding circles around her, laughing. She knew they weren't real. She kept walking anyway. The 8th mile stretched into forever. But finally, she saw buildings. A ranch house, weathered gray wood, windows that caught the afternoon sun. A barn that listed slightly to one side. Corrals and outbuildings. And blessed shade from a few struggling cottonwood trees near what must be a well or a spring. Clara made it to the front step of the ranch house before her leg gave out completely. She collapsed against the door, knocked weakly, and waited. Nothing. She knocked again, harder this time. Hello, is anyone there? Still nothing. Clara tried the door, unlocked. She pushed it open and called inside. Mr. Hale? My name is Clara Whitmore. I saw your notice in town. I'm looking for work. Silence. But not the silence of an empty house. The silence of a house holding its breath. Clara stepped inside, blinking as her eyes adjusted to the dimness. The house was simple. One main room with a kitchen area, a few doors leading to other rooms. And sprawled on the floor near the cold fireplace was a man. He wasn't moving. Clara dropped her case and limped over to him. He was maybe 30, tall even lying down, with dark hair plastered to his head with sweat. His breathing was shallow and rapid. When she touched his forehead, her hand came away burning. Fever. High fever. Mr. Hale? She shook his shoulder gently. Can you hear me? His eyes fluttered open, gray eyes, unfocused. He looked at her like she was another hallucination. Who? Clara Whitmore. I came about the job. You're burning up. How long have you been sick? Days, maybe. Don't know. His eyes closed again. Clara looked around. The house was a disaster. Dirty dishes piled in the basin. Clothes scattered. No food that she could see. The man had been trying to survive alone and failing. She should leave. The smart thing would be to leave, maybe ride back to town, except she had no horse, and get help. The smart thing would be to not tie herself to a man who looked like he might die in the next 24 hours. But Clara hadn't walked 8 miles through hell to do the smart thing. She took a breath. Then she got to work. First things first. Water. Clara found a bucket by the door and went looking for the well. Her leg protested every step, but she ignored it. Pain was just information now, and the information was that she needed to keep moving or they'd both die here. The well was behind the house, half hidden by one of the struggling cottonwoods. The rope was frayed but held. Clara pulled up a bucket of water that was blessedly cool and clear. At least the ranch had that going for it. She hauled the water back inside, trying not to spill too much. Ethan Hale hadn't moved from where he'd fallen. His breathing sounded worse, rattling in his chest like stones in a jar. Clara found some relatively clean rags in a drawer and soaked them in the well water. She knelt beside him, her bad leg screaming at her for it, and started wiping down his face and neck. The heat coming off him was terrifying. "Mr. Hale," she patted his cheek. "I need you to wake up. Just for a minute. Can you do that?" His eyes opened, but they weren't tracking right. He was looking past her at something that wasn't there. "The fence," he muttered. "Gotta fix the fence before they get out. The fence can wait. When did you last drink water?" No answer. He drifted away again. Clara grabbed his jaw, not gently. "Ethan, water. Now." Something in her tone must have reached him because his eyes focused on her face for just a second. "Who?" "Doesn't matter. Drink." She held the dipper to his lips and tipped it. Most of it ran down his chin, but some went down his throat. He coughed, tried to turn away, but she was persistent. Another dipper, then another. Finally, he pushed her hand away with surprising strength. "Stop. I'm fine." "You're burning up and delirious. You're the opposite of fine." "Don't need stranger?" "Well, you've got one anyway. Where do you keep clean sheets?" He just stared at her like she was speaking another language. Clara sighed and went exploring. The house was small enough that it didn't take long. 2 bedrooms off the main room. One was clearly Ethan's, unmade bed, clothes everywhere, smelled like sweat and sickness. The other looked like it hadn't been used in years, dust thick on everything. She found sheets in a trunk, along with blankets and what looked like women's clothes from a decade ago. Someone's mother or wife, probably. None of Clara's business right now. It took her 20 minutes to wrestle Ethan off the floor and onto his bed. He was dead weight, and she was half his size with a bad leg. She had to drag him, push him, lever him up bit by bit. By the time she got him onto the mattress, she was shaking and soaked with sweat. But she wasn't done. The sheets on the bed were disgusting, stained with sweat, and worse. She stripped them off, threw them in a corner to deal with later, and got the clean ones on. It wasn't pretty, but it was better than nothing. Ethan had passed out completely during all this, which was probably a mercy. Clara got his boots off, then hesitated. His shirt was soaked through. Leaving it on would just keep the fever going. "This is not how I imagined my first day," she muttered, and started working on his buttons. The shirt came off to reveal a man who'd been working himself to death. His ribs were too visible. His shoulders were burned dark by the sun, but covered in half-healed cuts and scrapes. There was a particularly nasty gash on his left forearm that looked infected. Clara found the source of the fever. She went back to the kitchen and dug through cabinets until she found salt, a bottle of whiskey that was mostly empty, and a knife. She heated water in a pot over the stove, which took forever to get going, and sterilized the knife in the flame. This was going to hurt. Him and her both. When she came back to the bedroom, Ethan's eyes were open again. He watched her set down the supplies with an expression that might have been fear or just exhaustion. "What are you doing?" "That cut on your arm is infected. It needs to be cleaned out, or you're going to lose the arm, maybe your life." You can't even stand up, so you're going to lie there and let me do this, or you're going to die. Those are your options." He closed his eyes. "You talk too much. You haven't heard anything yet." Clara poured whiskey over the knife in her hands. Then she unwrapped the filthy cloth he'd tied around the wound. The smell that came up made her stomach turn. The gash was deep, red, and swollen, oozing pus. "This is going to hurt," she said. "Just do it." She did. She opened the wound wider with the knife, draining the infection. Ethan went rigid, his good hand gripping the sheet so hard she heard threads pop. But he didn't scream, just breathed hard through his teeth while sweat poured down his face. When the worst was out, Clara flushed the wound with the salt water. This time he did make a noise, something between a growl and a sob. She worked fast, washing out everything she could see, then wrapped it tight with clean cloth. "Done," she said, sitting back. Ethan's eyes were closed, his jaw clenched so tight she thought he might crack teeth. "You enjoy torturing people?" "Not particularly, but infection's worse than pain." "Says who?" "Says everyone who's ever lost a limb to gangrene." He opened one eye to look at her. "Where'd you learn to do that?" "My mother. She used to help the neighborhood women when they were sick or birthing. I watched." "You a doctor?" "No, just stubborn." Something that might have been a smile crossed his face. Then his eyes closed again and his breathing evened out. Not sleep exactly. More like his body had decided to shut down everything non-essential while it focused on not dying. Clara covered him with a sheet and went back to the main room. The sun was starting to sink toward the horizon, painting everything orange and gold. She'd been here maybe 3 hours. It felt like 3 years. Her leg was a solid mass of pain now. She needed to sit, to rest. But first she needed to deal with the house because it was a disaster, and disasters bred more disasters. She started with the dishes. There was no way to heat enough water for all of them, so she did what she could with cold water and soap she found under the basin. Plates, cups, forks, one pot that had something growing in it that she didn't want to identify. Then she swept the floor. Dust, dirt, what might have been mouse droppings. The broom was falling apart, but it did the job. Then she took stock of the food situation. It was bad. Flour, beans, some salt pork that smelled questionable, coffee, and not much else. The root cellar, which she found after checking 3 different outbuildings, had some withered potatoes and onions. A few jars of preserves that were probably older than she was. She made soup. Simple, plain, the kind of thing her mother used to make when money was tight. Beans, the least withered potatoes, an onion, salt. It wasn't going to win any prizes, but it would keep them alive. While it cooked, she went to check on Ethan. He was still unconscious, but his breathing sounded better. The fever hadn't broken, but it wasn't climbing either. She got more water down his throat, changed the cool cloth on his forehead, checked the bandage on his arm. No fresh bleeding. Good enough. Clara ate her soup sitting at the kitchen table, too tired to taste it. Through the window, she could see the barn and corrals. She should check on the animals. She should do a lot of things. But her body was done. Finished. If she tried to stand up right now, she'd fall down and not get back up. She put her head down on the table, just for a minute. When she opened her eyes, it was full dark outside and someone was groaning in the bedroom. Clara lurched to her feet, every muscle screaming. She'd been asleep for hours. The fire in the stove had gone out. The house was cooling rapidly in that way desert places did at night. Ethan was thrashing in the bed, tangled in the sheet. "No, the water's gone. Can't be gone. Ethan," Clara grabbed his shoulders, trying to hold him still. "You're dreaming. Wake up." His eyes opened, but he wasn't seeing her. "Father, the well's dry. What do we do when the well's dry?" "The well's not dry. I pulled water from it this afternoon. You're sick and you're dreaming." He blinked, focused. "You're real? Last time I checked, I thought I imagined you. Most people wish they had." He was quiet for a moment, studying her face in the dim light from the moon through the window. "Why are you here?" "I came about your notice in town, the one looking for ranch hands." He almost laughed. It came out as a cough instead. "You? Ranch hand? I can learn. You can barely walk." Clara's jaw tightened. "I walked 8 miles in the desert heat to get here. I've been awake for probably 20 hours. I cleaned your infected arm, made you drink water, cooked food, and cleaned a house that looked like something died in it. So yes, I can barely walk. But I'm still here and you're still alive, so maybe we can skip the part where you tell me what I can't do." Ethan stared at her. Then he did laugh, though it turned into another coughing fit. When he caught his breath, he said, "You always this mean?" "Only when I'm tired. You should see me when I'm rested." Looking forward to it, he closed his eyes. "There's soup." "What?" "I can smell it. There's soup." "Yes." "Haven't had soup in weeks, months maybe." "When did you let your ranch hands go?" 6 weeks ago. Couldn't pay them. Drought's been bad. Lost half the herd, the other half scattered. Can't find them all on my own." So you've been doing everything yourself. Wasn't much choice. And you got sick. Cut myself on barbed wire. Thought it was fine. Then it wasn't fine. Then I couldn't ride. Couldn't work. Just kept getting worse. Clara sat down on the edge of the bed, her leg grateful for the rest. How long since you ate? Yesterday? Maybe the day before. Hard to tell. I'm getting you soup. If you say you can get it yourself, I'm going to dump it on your head. He smiled, just slightly. Yes, ma'am. The soup had gotten cold, but Clara reheated it and brought him a bowl. He tried to feed himself, but his hands were shaking too badly. After he nearly dropped the bowl, Clara took it from him. Open. I'm not a child. Then stop acting like one. Open. He opened. She spooned soup into his mouth, waiting while he chewed and swallowed. It was slow, awkward work, but he got most of the bowl down before he waved her off. Enough. Gonna be sick if I eat more. Clara set the bowl aside. Your fever's still high. It'll break. Or it'll kill you. Always a possibility. He shifted in the bed, wincing. What's your name again? Clara Whitmore. Clara. He rolled it around like he was tasting it. You're the woman Samuel Brennan left standing. Of course he knew. Everyone knew. Yes. He's an idiot. Clara blinked. What? Brennan. He's an idiot. Always has been. His father was smart, built something real. Samuel's just been trying not to lose it all. He wanted a wife who'd make him look good to the town. You don't look like someone who makes people look good. You look like someone who makes people work harder. I don't know if that's a compliment. It is. Out here, looking good gets you nowhere. Working hard might get you somewhere, might not. But at least you've got a chance. Clara didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. Ethan's eyes were drifting closed again. You can't stay. Why not? I can't pay you, can barely feed myself. I don't need much, food and a place to sleep. I can work for that. You can't do ranch work with that leg. I can do housework, cooking, cleaning, garden if you have one, sewing, whatever needs doing that doesn't involve riding horses. That's most of what needs doing. Then I'll learn, or you'll die out here alone trying to do it all yourself. She stood up, ignoring the protest from her leg. I'm staying, at least until you're back on your feet. After that, we'll see. You're bossy. You're half dead. Someone needs to be bossy. He smiled again, that small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Fair enough. Then he was asleep, just like that, his breathing evening out. Clara found blankets in the trunk and made a rough bed for herself on the floor in the main room. It wasn't comfortable, but she'd slept in worse places. The important thing was that she was inside, not walking through the desert. She was employed, sort of, and she was useful. That was enough for now. She slept hard and woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of someone moving around. Clara sat up, every muscle protesting, and found Ethan standing in the doorway to his room. He was wearing pants and nothing else, one hand braced against the doorframe. What are you doing? Clara demanded. Checking the stock. They haven't been fed and... Sit down before you fall down. I'm fine. You're gray and shaking. Sit. For a moment, she thought he'd argue. Then his legs gave out and he sat down hard on the floor. Clara got up, her own leg hating her for it, and went to him. The animals, he said, they need... Tell me what to do and I'll do it. You don't know anything about ranch work. So teach me. He looked up at her, his gray eyes clearer than they'd been the night before, but still fever bright. You're serious. Do I look like I'm joking? He thought about this. Then slowly he started talking. The chickens in the coop needed feed and water. There was grain in the barn, left side in the bin. The 2 cows in the near corral needed hay, also in the barn, upper loft. The horses, he had 2 left, needed water and hay too. The pump by the trough was working last, he checked. Clara listened, memorizing. When he was done, she said, How do I get hay down from a loft? There's a ladder and a pitchfork. I've never used a pitchfork. It's a fork with long tines. You stab the hay and throw it down. That sounds dangerous. It is. Try not to stab yourself. Clara went to the barn. It was bigger than it looked from outside, with stalls for at least 6 horses and a loft that ran the length of the building. The ladder was rough wood, missing a rung about halfway up. She climbed it carefully, favoring her good leg. The loft was full of hay, but not nearly as full as it should have been. Maybe enough for a few more weeks if they were careful. After that, well, that was a problem for later. She grabbed the pitchfork and stabbed at a bale. The fork went in, but the hay didn't want to come back out. She wrestled with it, finally got a chunk free, and threw it down to the barn floor. It scattered everywhere. "That's one way to do it," Ethan said from below. Clara looked down. He'd made it to the barn and was leaning against a support post, watching her. "I thought I told you to rest. And I thought I told you I was fine. We're both liars then." She threw down more hay, getting slightly better at it. When she figured there was enough, she climbed down. Ethan showed her how to break it up and distribute it to the animals. The cows ate like they hadn't seen food in a week, which they probably hadn't. The chickens were easier. Clara scattered grain and collected 3 eggs from the nesting boxes. The chickens seemed offended that she existed but didn't attack her, which she counted as a victory. The horses were in a corral behind the barn. 2 of them, like Ethan had said. One was a big bay gelding with kind eyes. The other was smaller, a gray mare with an attitude problem. She tried to bite Clara when she got close with the hay. "That's Smoke," Ethan said. "She's mean. I like her already." Ethan almost smiled. Then he swayed on his feet. Clara dropped the hay and caught him before he fell. "That's it, back to bed." "I need to check the fence line. The fence line has survived this long without you. It can survive another day." She got him back to the house, which took forever because he was stubborn and kept trying to do it himself. By the time she wrestled him back into bed, they were both exhausted. "You're impossible," Clara said. "You're annoying." "Good, we're even." She made him drink more water, checked his arm. The bandage was soaked through with drainage but no blood, which seemed like progress, and changed it for a fresh one. His fever was still there but lower than yesterday. He might actually live. When she went back to the main room, she found bread that was more rock than food, and eggs that were fresh. She made something approximating breakfast and ate standing up because sitting down seemed like admitting defeat. The day stretched ahead of her, full of things she didn't know how to do. But she'd figure it out. She had to. Over the next 3 days, Clara learned more about ranch work than she'd ever wanted to know. She learned that feeding animals was the easy part, keeping them healthy, keeping their water clean, dealing with their various problems. That was the hard part. She learned that cows were smarter than they looked and more stubborn than seemed possible. She learned that chickens were tiny dinosaurs who held grudges. She learned that Smoke the horse would only tolerate her if Clara brought her extra hay, and even then, it was a coin flip whether she'd get bitten. She learned that Ethan Hale was possibly the most stubborn man alive. Every day he tried to get up and work. Every day Clara had to physically stop him or trick him back into bed. They argued constantly about what needed to be done, about who should do it, about whether the fence could wait another day or the well needed checking or the barn roof needed patching. "You're going to work yourself to death," Clara said on the 3rd day, after she'd found him trying to lift a saddle despite the fact that he could barely stand. "Someone has to." "Why does it have to be you?" "Because it's my ranch, my responsibility, and you'll be real responsible when you're dead in a ditch somewhere." He set the saddle down and turned to look at her. His fever had finally broken during the night, leaving him weak but clear-headed. "Why do you care?" The question caught her off guard. "What?" "Why do you care if I work myself to death? You barely know me." Clara thought about this. "Because," she said finally, "if you die, I have to walk back to town. And I really don't want to walk back to town." He laughed. Actually laughed. The first real laugh she'd heard from him. "That's the only reason?" "That's the main reason. You're a terrible liar. I'm a great liar. You're just delirious from fever. Fever broke last night. Then you're delirious from stupidity." They stared at each other. Then Ethan said quietly, "Thank you. For staying. For taking care of things. I know I've been impossible? I was going to say difficult. Those mean the same thing. Clara." She stopped. He so rarely used her actual name. "What?" "I mean it. Thank you. I'd be dead if you hadn't shown up." Clara felt something uncomfortable in her chest. She wasn't good at accepting gratitude. "You're welcome. Now get back in bed before I hit you with something." "You wouldn't hit an injured man." "Try me." He went back to bed. but he was smiling. That night, Clara cooked the best meal she could manage with what they had. Beans, the last of the salt pork, fresh eggs, biscuits made from the dwindling flour supply. Ethan ate at the table for the first time, moving slow but moving. He'd shaved, badly, nicking himself twice, and put on a clean shirt. "We need supplies," he said. "Flour, coffee, beans. Hey, if Carter's got any. Medicine, bandages. Can you afford it?" "No, but Carter extends credit. I'll pay him when I can sell some cattle." "If you can find the cattle." When I find them." Clara pushed beans around her plate. "How much money do you have?" "Why?" "Because I need to know how bad things are." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "About $40 in cash. Maybe another 100 if I sell everything that's not essential. The ranch is worth more, but only if someone wants to buy it and nobody does, not in a drought." $40? Clara's stomach sank. "That's not much." "No, it's not. How long can you stretch it?" "If I'm careful, 2 months. Maybe 3 if we don't eat much." Clara did the math in her head. "And if the drought doesn't break?" "Then I lose the ranch. The bank takes it, and I start over somewhere else doing something else." He met her eyes across the table. "You should go back to town. This place is sinking. No reason for you to sink with it. Is that what you want?" "What I want doesn't matter. What makes sense matters." "That's not an answer." Ethan leaned back in his chair. "No, I don't want you to go. You've kept this place running for 3 days while I was useless. You've kept me alive. Having you here—" He stopped, shook his head. "But I can't pay you. I can barely feed you. Asking you to stay is asking you to gamble on a losing hand." Clara thought about her $8, which was still tucked in her case. She thought about Ruth's boarding house and the 3 days that had already passed. She thought about Samuel Brennan riding away. She thought about going back east to her aunt. Then she thought about the way Smoke the horse had finally let her touch her nose this morning, about the chickens who now came when she called, about the satisfaction of seeing Ethan eat a full meal after days of forcing down soup. "I'm staying," she said. "Clara, I'm staying. We'll figure out the money. We'll figure out the supplies. We'll figure out how to find your cattle and survive the drought, but I'm staying." "Why?" It was the same question he'd asked before. This time, Clara gave him a different answer. "Because for the first time since I got off that train, someone needs me. Not pities me. Not tolerates me. Actually needs me. And maybe that's selfish, wanting to be needed. But I don't care. I'm staying." Ethan looked at her for a long time. Then he nodded. "All right. Then we better figure out how to make this work." They talked into the night, making plans that were half hope and half desperation. Ethan would rest for 2 more days, then they'd ride out together, Clara on the gentler horse going slow, to check the fence lines and look for the scattered herd. They'd cut expenses to the bone. They'd make the supplies stretch. They'd work from dawn to dusk and hope it was enough. It probably wouldn't be enough. They both knew that. But knowing something and accepting it were different things entirely. Clara finally went to her makeshift bed on the floor, exhausted but somehow lighter than she'd felt in days. She had a purpose. She had work. She had a place, even if that place was barely hanging on. It was more than she'd had a week ago. Through the thin wall, she could hear Ethan moving around in his room, settling in for the night. Tomorrow they'd start fresh. Tomorrow they'd figure out the next step. But tonight, for the first time since stepping off that train, Clara Whitmore fell asleep without wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake. The morning after their first night searching for cattle, Clara woke to find Ethan already gone from his bedroll. She sat up too quickly, and her leg protested with a sharp spike of pain that made her gasp. 2 weeks of marriage, and she still wasn't used to sharing space with another person, to the sound of someone else breathing in the dark, to waking up and having to orient herself to this new reality. She found him outside, standing by the corral, and looking at the horses with the kind of focus that meant he was thinking about something he didn't want to say out loud. "What's wrong?" Clara asked, limping over to him. "Nothing. Just planning the day." "You're a terrible liar." Ethan glanced at her, then back at the horses. "I was thinking about my father. He used to stand right here every morning, looking at the land like he was checking to make sure it hadn't disappeared overnight. Like if he stopped paying attention for even a minute, everything would fall apart." "Did it?" "Eventually. Drought got worse every year. Water table dropped. Grass dried up. He fought it until the day he died, 3 years ago this month. Heart gave out while he was digging a new well that never found water. Ethan's jaw tightened. I always thought I'd do better than him, that I'd learn from his mistakes. Turns out, I'm just repeating them with less grace. Clara didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. Sometimes silence was better than empty comfort. They rode out an hour later after a breakfast of weak coffee and the last of the decent bread. The land stretched before them in shades of rust and gold, beautiful in a way that made Clara's chest ache, beautiful and deadly, like most things in the territory. They'd been riding for maybe 2 hours when Clara's horse suddenly shied, nearly throwing her. She grabbed the saddle horn with both hands, heart hammering, as Ethan wheeled his mount around. What is it? I don't know. She just spooked. Then Clara saw it. A rattlesnake, coiled in the shade of a rock not 10 feet from where they'd been riding. Its tail was vibrating with that sound that made something primitive in Clara's brain scream danger. Ethan dismounted carefully, drawing his rifle. Don't move. I wasn't planning on it. The shot echoed across the desert, sharp and final. The snake's head disappeared in a spray of blood and dust. Clara's horse danced sideways, but she managed to keep her seat, barely. You all right? Ethan asked, coming over to check. Fine. Just startled. Out here. Startled can get you killed. He looked up at her, his gray eyes serious. You're doing good, Clara. Better than I expected. But this land doesn't care about effort or good intentions. It'll kill you for one moment of inattention. I know. Do you? Because watching you almost get thrown just now... He stopped, shook his head. Never mind. Say it. I was going to say I can't lose you, which is stupid because we barely know each other. But watching that snake, watching your horse spook, all I could think was that if something happened to you, I don't know what I'd do. Clara stared at him. They'd been married 2 weeks. 2 weeks of working side by side, eating together, sleeping in the same bed, carefully, chastely, with space between them. 2 weeks of being partners in survival. But this was the first time either of them had admitted to feeling something beyond practical necessity. Nothing's going to happen to me, Clara said finally. You don't know that. No, but I'm still here, and I'm planning to stay that way. They found 3 more cattle that day, scattered in a ravine that still had some scrub grass. Getting them out was harder than Clara expected. The cattle were half wild from months alone, and they fought every step. By the time they got the 3 head back to the holding area, Clara was exhausted and covered in dust, and her leg felt like someone had driven nails through it. That night, around the fire, Ruth handed her a tin cup of something that smelled like death. Drink it. Clara sniffed it and recoiled. What is it? Willow bark tea. It'll help with the pain. How did you know? You've been limping worse all day, and you keep rubbing your hip when you think no one's looking. Ruth's voice was matter-of-fact, not unkind. I'm not judging, just trying to help. Clara drank the tea. It tasted as bad as it smelled, but within an hour the worst of the pain had dulled to something manageable. She caught Ethan watching her from across the fire with an expression she couldn't quite read. Later, when they were alone in their shared bedroll, they'd given up on separate sleeping arrangements on the second night because it was too cold, Ethan said quietly, You should have told me it was hurting that bad. Would it have changed anything? I would have let you rest more. We don't have time for me to rest more. We have less than 4 weeks to find 40 cattle and get them to market. Clara shifted to find a more comfortable position. I'm fine, Ethan. I've been managing this leg for 8 years. I know my limits. Do you? Because you've been pushing yourself past what most people could manage since the day you showed up. What happens when you push too far and break something permanently? Then I deal with it, like I deal with everything else. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I don't want you to have to deal with everything alone. I'm not alone. I have you. Do you? The question hung in the air between them. Or do you have a business arrangement that occasionally sleeps in the same bed? Clara turned to look at him. In the dim light from the dying fire, his face was half shadow. What do you want, Ethan? I don't know. More than this? Less than this? Something that makes sense. He rubbed his face with both hands. I married you because it was practical, because it solved a problem. But somewhere in the past 2 weeks, it stopped being just practical, and I don't know how to navigate that. You think I do? You're better at people than I am. Clara laughed, short and sharp. I'm terrible at people. That's why I was on that train platform alone. That's why my aunt couldn't wait to get rid of me. That's why Samuel took one look and rode away. Samuel's an idiot. Maybe. Or maybe he saw what everyone else sees, someone who's more trouble than they're worth. Ethan propped himself up on one elbow to look at her properly. You really believe that? Sometimes. Then you're an idiot too. He said it gently without heat. Clara, in 2 weeks you've kept this place running better than I was managing in the months before. You've learned to ride despite a leg that should make it impossible. You've worked harder than anyone I've ever known. You stood up to Samuel and the whole damn town without flinching. If that's what trouble looks like, I'll take trouble every time. Clara felt her throat tighten. That's just necessity. None of it makes me worth... Stop. He put a finger against her lips. Just stop. You don't get to decide your worth. Not alone. Not based on what other people who don't know you think. You want to know what I think? I think I got lucky the day you walked 8 miles through hell to show up on my doorstep. I think marrying you was the smartest thing I've ever done. And I think if you don't stop trying to prove you deserve to exist, you're going to work yourself to death, and I'll be back to being alone in a house that's too quiet. Clara didn't realize she was crying until Ethan wiped tears off her cheek with his thumb. She'd been holding so much in, the fear of failing, the exhaustion, the constant low-level pain, the knowledge that they were probably going to lose everything anyway. It all came crashing out in ugly hitching sobs that she tried to muffle against his shoulder. He just held her, and didn't say anything. Didn't tell her it would be all right, or that everything would work out. He just held her while she cried out 2 weeks of terror and determination and the bone-deep relief of finally having someone who didn't need her to be anything other than exactly what she was. When she finally stopped crying, her face was wet and her nose was running, and she probably looked terrible. But Ethan was still holding her, one hand rubbing slow circles on her back. Sorry, she managed. Don't be. I'm not usually... I know, that's why it needed to happen. Clara pulled back enough to look at him. This is strange, isn't it? This thing we're doing. Getting married for practical reasons and then maybe feeling something real. Probably the strangest thing I've ever done. And I once tried to dig a well by hand in the middle of summer. He smiled slightly. But strange doesn't mean wrong. What does it mean? I have no idea, but I'm willing to find out if you are. Clara thought about it. About the past 2 weeks of working side by side, learning each other's rhythms, building something that might be a partnership or might be the beginning of something deeper. About the way her heart had jumped when his horse came back over the ridge each evening. About how the bed felt cold when he got up before her in the mornings. Yeah, she said finally. I'm willing to find out. He kissed her then, properly this time. Not the careful wedding kiss or the quick pecks they'd shared in passing. This was something different, deeper, more honest, full of all the things neither of them knew how to say out loud. When they broke apart, Clara was breathing hard and something warm had settled in her chest. We should sleep, Ethan said, but he didn't sound convinced. We should. They didn't. They stayed awake talking in whispers about everything and nothing. His childhood on the ranch, her years in Philadelphia, the dreams they'd had before life got complicated. It was the kind of conversation people had when they were falling in love and didn't quite realize it yet. Clara fell asleep with her head on Ethan's shoulder, feeling safer than she had in years. The next morning brought a new problem. They were down to their last day's worth of supplies, and they'd only found 25 cattle, still 15 short of what they needed, with less than 3 weeks until the loan came due. We're not going to make it, Clara said, doing the math in her head for the 10th time. Even if we find the rest today, we'd have to drive them to market, sell them, get back here. There's not enough time. Then we make time. Ethan was loading his saddlebags with the last of the coffee and beans. We push harder, cover more ground, split up if we have to. That's dangerous. Everything out here is dangerous. At least this way we're dangerous with a purpose. They split up that afternoon over Clara's objections. Ethan headed north toward the roughest country. Clara took the eastern quadrant, riding slow and careful, scanning for any sign of cattle. It felt wrong being out here alone, exposed and vulnerable in a way she hadn't felt when Ethan was nearby. She'd been riding for maybe 3 hours when she saw them, not cattle, but riders. 3 of them, moving toward her from the direction of town. Her stomach dropped. Samuel Brennan was in the lead, flanked by 2 men Clara didn't recognize. They rode up fast and surrounded her in a way that made it clear this wasn't a friendly encounter. "Mrs. Hale," Samuel said, and the way he said it made her name sound like an insult. "Out here all alone? That seems unwise. I'm looking for our cattle." "Your cattle? That's interesting. According to the bank, they're still technically Ethan's cattle until the loan is paid." "You're just the woman who happened to marry him." "What do you want, Samuel?" "I want to make sure you understand the situation. You think marrying Ethan solved your problems? All it did was tie you to a sinking ship. When he loses the ranch, and he will lose it, you'll lose it too. You'll be right back where you started. Worse, actually, because now you'll be a failed ranch wife instead of just a rejected mail-order bride." Clara's hands tightened on the reins. "We're not going to lose the ranch." "Really? You found what, 25 head? You need at least 40. That's 15 cattle to find in less than 3 weeks, assuming they haven't died or scattered so far you'll never locate them. And even if you do, you have to drive them to market, negotiate a sale, get back here, and pay the bank. The math doesn't work, Clara. It never did." "Then why are you here? If you're so certain we'll fail, why bother tracking me down?" Samuel's smile was cold. "Because I want to offer you a way out. Leave now. I'll pay for your passage back east. You can tell people the marriage didn't work out, that ranch life wasn't for you. You'll still have your dignity. You'll still have options. And Ethan? Ethan made his choice when he married you. He can live with the consequences." One of the other men, older, with a scar across his cheek, leaned forward in his saddle. "Samuel's being generous, ma'am. Most men wouldn't offer anything. You should take the deal while it's on the table." "Or what?" Clara asked. The scarred man shrugged. "Or things might get unpleasant. Accidents happen out here. People get lost. Cattle disappear. It's a harsh land." Clara felt ice run down her spine. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm stating facts. This territory takes what it wants. Smart people don't fight that. They adapt." Samuel held up a hand. "Nobody's threatening anyone. We're just offering you a rational choice. Stay and lose everything, or leave and salvage what you can." Clara looked at the 3 men surrounding her, at the empty desert stretching in all directions, at the sky that was already starting to show the colors of late afternoon. She thought about Ethan riding alone through the rough country to the north. She thought about the 25 cattle they'd found and the 15 they still needed. She thought about the ledger with its impossible numbers. Then she thought about walking away, about getting on a train and disappearing back into the life she'd fought so hard to leave, about proving her aunt right, about vindicating Samuel's decision to ride away, about abandoning Ethan when he needed her most. "No," she said. Samuel's eyebrows rose. "No? No. I'm not leaving. We're going to find those cattle. We're going to pay off that loan. And we're going to keep fighting for as long as it takes. So you can ride back to town and tell everyone that Clara Hale isn't going anywhere. You're making a mistake. That's my right. It's going to cost you everything. Then I'll pay the price. Now get out of my way. I have cattle to find." For a moment she thought Samuel might push it, might do something stupid that would force a confrontation. But he was a coward at his core, and 3 men surrounding 1 woman on horseback was different from actually having to face consequences. "Your funeral?" he said finally, and wheeled his horse around. The other 2 men followed, leaving Clara alone with her heart pounding and her hand shaking on the reins. She waited until they were out of sight before she let herself react. Then she dismounted, awkwardly, her leg not cooperating, and stood with her forehead pressed against her horse's neck, trying to get her breathing under control. They'd threatened her. Not directly, not in a way she could prove, but the message had been clear. Leave or face consequences. And she'd told them no. She'd chosen to stay even knowing what it might cost. Clara climbed back on her horse and kept searching. She found 2 more cattle before dark, scattered in a dry wash. 2 more cattle that brought their total to 27, still 13 short with time running out. When she made it back to camp after sunset, Ethan was already there, pacing by the fire. He saw her, and relief flooded his face. "Where were you? I've been back for an hour. I ran into Samuel." and some friends of his. Ethan went very still. Did they hurt you? No, just tried to scare me, offered to pay for me to leave. Clara dismounted and nearly fell. Her leg had gone completely stiff from hours in the saddle. Ethan caught her before she hit the ground. What did you say? I told him no. I told him no, she repeated. I told him we were going to find the cattle and pay off the loan, and that I wasn't going anywhere. And then I found 2 more head, so we're at 27 total. Ethan stared at her for a long moment. Then he pulled her into a hug so tight she could barely breathe. You're either the bravest person I've ever met, or the craziest. Can I be both? Yeah, you can be both. He pulled back to look at her face. Samuel's not going to let this go. If he's making threats, let him threaten. We have bigger problems, like finding 13 more cattle in less than 3 weeks. 15. Clara's stomach sank. What? I did the math again. With what the market's paying right now and what we owe the bank, we need at least 42 head, maybe 45 to be safe, which means we need to find 15 to 18 more. That's impossible. Probably. Ethan didn't sound defeated, though. He sounded determined. But we're going to try anyway. The next 3 days were brutal. They rode from before dawn until after dark, covering ground they'd already searched, checking ravines and box canyons and anywhere cattle might hide. They found 3 more head, then 2, then nothing for an entire day. Clara's leg was a constant source of agony now. She'd pushed it too hard for too long, and it was punishing her, but she couldn't stop. Every day that passed was 1 day closer to losing everything. On the 4th day, Ruth rode out to their camp alone. She looked grim. Carter sent me. He wanted you to know, Samuel's been to see the bank manager. He's pushing them to foreclose early, claiming Ethan's not managing the ranch properly, that having you involved is affecting his judgment. The bank's considering it. Ethan swore viciously. They can't do that. We have until the end of the month. They can if they claim breach of the loan terms, and Samuel's convincing enough that they're listening. Ruth looked between them. How many cattle have you found? 32, Clara said. We need at least 45. That's 13 more. In 2.5 weeks. Ruth shook her head. It's not going to happen. Even if you find them, you don't have time to... Then we make time, Clara interrupted. We work harder. We search longer. We don't sleep if we have to. Clara, you can barely walk. I can ride. That's what matters. Ruth and Ethan exchanged a look that Clara didn't like. What? You're killing yourself, Ruth said bluntly. Look at you. You've lost weight you didn't have to lose. You're gray. That leg is going to give out permanently if you keep pushing it like this. And for what? A ranch that might be lost anyway? For my home, Clara said quietly. For the first place I've ever belonged. For my husband. For all of it. And I'm not stopping until someone physically prevents me. Stubborn fool, Ruth muttered, but there was respect in her voice. All right, then let me help. I'll ride back to town. Gather everyone who helped before. We'll do one final push, all of us, covering as much ground as possible. If the cattle are out there, we'll find them. Ruth, Ethan started. Don't argue with me. I'm old and mean, and I've already made up my mind. She turned her horse toward town. Give me 2 days. Then we ride out together and we finish this. She was gone before either of them could respond, leaving Clara and Ethan standing in the dust. She's right, you know, Ethan said quietly. About you pushing too hard. I know. If you break yourself permanently, then I break, but I'm not stopping. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. All right. Then we both keep going until we can't anymore. They found 4 more cattle that day and 3 the next, 39 total. Just 6 more and they'd have 45. Just 6 more cattle between survival and losing everything. Ruth returned on the 3rd day with the same crew from before plus 2 more. Ranch hands from a neighboring property who'd heard about their situation and wanted to help. 10 people total, ready for one final push into the deep country where the last cattle had to be. They rode out at dawn in a line, spread across the desert like beaters flushing game. Clara rode beside Ethan, her legs screaming, her whole body exhausted beyond anything she'd ever experienced. But she kept going because stopping meant giving up, and giving up meant proving Samuel right. They found the first 2 by mid-morning, a cow and her calf, hidden in a narrow canyon. 4 more to go. The next 3 by early afternoon, scattered across a plateau that still had some water from a spring that somehow hadn't dried up. 1 more to go. The sun was starting to sink toward the horizon when one of the ranch hands shouted. Everyone converged on his position to find 5 head of cattle clustered around a dying cottonwood tree, the last green thing for miles. 5 cattle. They needed 1, but had found 5. Clara felt something break loose in her chest. Relief and disbelief and exhaustion all mixed together. They'd done it. 44 head total, more than enough. They'd actually done it. Ethan rode up beside her, his face streaked with dust and sweat. "We found them." "We found them," Clara agreed, and her voice cracked on the words. They drove all 44 head back to the holding area, working through the night because they couldn't risk losing a single animal now. By the time they got them all secured, the sun was rising again, and Clara had been awake for over 30 hours. She slid off her horse, and her leg gave out completely. She hit the ground hard, stars exploding across her vision. Ethan was there in seconds, pulling her up, checking for broken bones. "Clara, I'm fine, just tired." "You're not fine, you're barely conscious." "Doesn't matter. We found them. We found the cattle. We're going to make it." He pulled her close, and she felt him shaking against her. "Yeah, we're going to make it." They drove the herd to market 2 days later, moving slow but steady. The same buyer was there, the same hard man who'd tried to cheat them before. But this time Clara was ready. She negotiated hard, using every piece of information she'd learned from the other ranchers, every trick Ruth had taught her, every ounce of stubbornness she possessed. When the buyer finally named his price, $268, she didn't hesitate. Deal. They rode back to Salvation Creek with the money secure and Clara barely clinging to consciousness. Ethan had to help her down from her horse when they reached the bank. Her leg wouldn't support her weight at all anymore. Thomas Garrett counted the money with shaking hands. When he finished, he looked up with something like awe. "This pays off the loan with $47 remaining. You did it. I honestly didn't think—" He stopped. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Hale. The ranch is yours, free and clear." Clara heard the words from what felt like a great distance. She'd done it. They'd done it. Against impossible odds, against Samuel's interference, against the land itself, they'd done it. Then the room tilted sideways and everything went dark. The town meeting happened on a Thursday, which meant Salvation Creek's one saloon was packed with men who should have been working but had come to watch the spectacle instead. Word had spread fast. Samuel Brennan had called for a gathering to discuss what he kept calling the situation at the Hale Ranch. Clara had heard about it from Ruth, who'd ridden out to the ranch 2 days prior with supplies and a warning. "He's poisoning them against you," Ruth had said, unloading flour and coffee from her wagon, "telling everyone you're taking advantage of Ethan, that you're some kind of opportunist who saw a dying man and decided to steal his ranch." Clara had been mucking out the chicken coop at the time, which meant she was covered in dirt and feathers and not in the mood for town gossip. "Let him talk." "It's not just talk." Carter's cut off Ethan's credit. "Says too many people are asking questions about why he's extending money to a man who's got a strange woman living with him unwed. The bank sent someone out here last week. Did Ethan tell you that?" Clara had stopped shoveling. "No." "They're considering calling in his loan. Samuel's been in the bank manager's ear suggesting the ranch isn't being properly managed, that Ethan's judgment is compromised." "By what? By not dying alone?" Ruth had given her a long look. "By you, Clara. You're the scandal. A mail-order bride rejected by one man, living with another man unmarried. It doesn't matter that you saved Ethan's life or that this place would have collapsed without you. To them, you're just a woman in the wrong place making respectable people uncomfortable. So what do they want? For me to leave?" "Some of them, yes. Others just want to feel superior. Samuel wants revenge for being made to look bad. You choosing Ethan's failing ranch over crawling back east reflects poorly on his decision to reject you." Ruth had paused. "Ethan needs to go to this meeting. He needs to face them down. And you need to let him do it alone." That last part had stung. "I'm not afraid of them." "I know you're not. But if you show up, you prove Samuel's point, that you've got some kind of hold on Ethan. If Ethan goes alone and stands up for himself, it's harder to claim he's being manipulated. Clara had hated the logic even as she recognized its truth. So now Ethan was riding into town alone while Clara stayed at the ranch, pretending to work while her mind spun in circles about everything that could go wrong. She was feeding the chickens when she heard hoofbeats. Too early for Ethan to be back. Her stomach clenched as she turned toward the sound. 3 riders came into view. Samuel Brennan in the lead, flanked by 2 men Clara didn't recognize. They rode right up to the house like they owned it, and Samuel dismounted with the easy confidence of someone who'd never been told no in his life. "Miss Whitmore," he called out, not bothering to approach closer. "I'd like a word." Clara set down the feed bucket and walked toward them, forcing herself not to limp more than necessary. "Mr. Brennan, you know where the town meeting is, don't you? Because it's not here." "Meeting's over. Thought you'd want to know how it went." Her heart dropped, but she kept her face neutral. "I'm sure Ethan will tell me when he gets back." Samuel smiled, and it was the smile of a man who enjoyed other people's discomfort. "Will he? That's interesting, because he seemed pretty shaken when he left. Might not be in a talking mood." One of the other men, older, with a sheriff's badge that looked like it had been pinned on as a formality, cleared his throat. "Ma'am, there's been some concern raised about the situation here. Questions about propriety and whether Mr. Hale is in a fit state to manage his affairs." "Ethan is managing just fine." "That's not what folks are saying. They're saying he's been sick, that his judgment might be impaired, that maybe he's not thinking clearly about certain arrangements." The sheriff's eyes flicked over her in a way that made Clara's skin crawl. "Some people think it might be best if you move back to town. For everyone's sake." "By everyone, you mean Samuel." "I mean the community," the sheriff said, but without much conviction. Samuel stepped forward. "I'll be direct, Miss Whitmore. You're an embarrassment. To yourself, to Ethan, to Salvation Creek. You show up uninvited, insert yourself into a man's home when he's too sick to refuse, and now you're playing house like you have some kind of claim on him or his property. It's unseemly, it's improper, and it's going to stop." Clara felt rage building in her chest, hot and sharp. "I saved his life." "Did you? Or did you just happen to be there when he recovered on his own? Either way, your time here is done. We've taken up a collection, enough to get you back east. It's generous, considering. You should take it." "I'm not leaving." "Then you're forcing our hand." Samuel gestured to the sheriff. "There are legal remedies for this situation. A woman of questionable character residing with a man unmarried, possibly exerting undue influence, possibly positioning herself to make claims on his property. That's grounds for removal. We'd rather handle this quietly, but we will involve the law if necessary." The third man, who hadn't spoken yet, finally did. He was younger, maybe 30, with the look of someone who spent more time with ledgers than livestock. "I'm Thomas Garrett from the bank. Mr. Hale's loan is coming due in 6 weeks. Given the current circumstances and questions about the ranch's management, the bank has decided not to extend. He'll need to pay in full or face foreclosure." Clara's blood went cold. "You're doing this because of me." "We're doing this because the situation has become untenable," Garrett said smoothly. "The bank can't extend credit to someone whose judgment is in question. His judgment is fine, better than fine. He's been working himself half to death trying to save this place. With your help, which raises questions about who's really running things." Samuel's smile widened. "See the problem? You stay, and Ethan loses everything. You go, and maybe, just maybe, the bank reconsiders. Maybe his credit gets restored. Maybe he has a chance." Clara understood then. This wasn't about propriety or concern for Ethan. This was Samuel punishing them both. Her for the humiliation of choosing Ethan's failing ranch over crawling away in shame, Ethan for taking in the woman Samuel had rejected. And he'd found the perfect weapon. Her presence was now the thing destroying what little chance Ethan had of saving his ranch. "You're a coward," Clara said quietly. "Too weak to say no to my face, so you rode away. And now you can't stand that I found something better than whatever you would have offered." Samuel's face darkened. "Better? Look around you. This place is dying. Ethan's barely holding on. You think you found something better? You found another failure, just one too proud to admit it. Get off this property. Or what? You'll have Ethan defend your honor? He can barely defend his own interests right now, and that's partly your fault. Clara took a step forward, fury overriding caution. I said get off this property. The sheriff held up a hand. Ma'am, we're leaving. But think about what was said here. You've got 2 days to make a decision. After that, we'll be forced to take action. They mounted up and rode away, Samuel looking back once with an expression of satisfaction that made Clara want to throw something at his head. She stood there shaking with rage and fear until the sound of hoofbeats faded. Then she went into the house and sat down at the table, trying to think. 2 days. The bank calling in the loan because of her. The town united in thinking she was some kind of schemer. And Ethan, what had Samuel meant about him being shaken? What had happened at that meeting? She didn't have to wait long to find out. Ethan rode in about an hour later, moving stiff and careful like someone who'd taken a beating. He didn't say anything as he unsaddled his horse and turned it into the corral. Didn't say anything as he came into the house and poured himself water from the bucket. Clara watched him drink 3 full dippers before she spoke. How bad was it? You heard. Samuel came by with the sheriff and the bank manager, gave me an ultimatum. Ethan's jaw tightened. Let me guess. Leave or I lose everything. Essentially. He set down the dipper and turned to face her. His eyes looked hollow, exhausted. The meeting was worse than I expected. Samuel had it all planned out. Had people ready to speak against me, against you, against what we're doing here. Said I was being taken advantage of. That you were manipulating me because I was sick. That I wasn't thinking clearly. What did you say? I told them the truth, that you showed up when I was dying. That you saved my life, kept this place from collapsing, worked harder than anyone I've ever known. I told them that any man who'd reject you was a fool, and that included Samuel. Despite everything, Clara felt warmth in her chest. How'd that go over? About how you'd expect. Half of them looked uncomfortable. The other half looked like they'd already made up their minds, and nothing I said would matter. He sat down heavily at the table. Then Samuel pulled out his trump card, got the bank manager to stand up and announce they're calling in my loan, got Carter to confirm he's cutting off credit, made it clear that if you stay, I'm finished. And if I go, then maybe they reconsider. Maybe I get enough time to round up the cattle, make a sale, buy myself a few more months. He looked at her directly. But we both know that's garbage. Even if you left tomorrow, Samuel's poisoned things too thoroughly. The bank wants an excuse to take this place. The town wants something to gossip about. You leaving just makes it easier for them. So what do we do? Ethan was quiet for a long time. Then he said, there's one thing that would shut all of them up permanently. One thing they couldn't argue with or twist around. Clara's stomach dropped because she suddenly knew what he was going to say. We get married, Ethan said. The words hung in the air between them like something fragile and dangerous. That's not funny, Clara said finally. I'm not joking. Think about it. Right now you're a woman of questionable character living with me unwed. But if we're married, you're my wife. You have every right to be here. You have legal standing. They can't say you're manipulating me if you're my legal partner. And the bank, they'd have a harder time claiming I'm not capable of managing my affairs if I'm capable of making a rational decision about marriage. Marriage isn't a business strategy. Out here it is. Half the marriages in this territory are arrangements. Partners to work the land, raise children, survive. Love's a luxury most people can't afford. Clara stood up, her leg protesting, and walked to the window. Outside, the sun was starting its descent toward the horizon, painting everything in shades of amber and rust. You don't want to marry me. You're just trying to protect your ranch. I'm trying to protect both of us. You think going back to town is going to work out well for you? Samuel's made sure everyone knows you're a scandal. Ruth might let you stay, but how long before the pressure gets too much? How long before you're forced out of Salvation Creek entirely, with even less than you had when you arrived? So your solution is to tie yourself to me permanently? My solution is to give us both a fighting chance. Clara turned to look at him. And what happens when the drought doesn't break? When the loan comes due and we can't pay it? We'll both lose everything. You'll have a wife you didn't want and no ranch. At least I'll be alive to regret it, which I wouldn't be without you. He stood up and crossed to her, stopping a few feet away. Clara, I'm not going to pretend this is romantic. I'm not going to pretend I'm offering you some kind of fairy tale. What I'm offering is partnership. You work this ranch, Help me hold it together, and in return you have a legal claim to be here. You have protection. You have a home. For how long? Until the bank takes it? Maybe. Or maybe we find a way to make it work. Maybe the drought breaks. Maybe we find the cattle and make enough to pay off the loan. Maybe we both die trying, but at least we die having fought for something instead of just giving up. Clara looked into his eyes and saw exhaustion and determination and something else she couldn't quite name. You barely know me. I know you walked 8 miles through desert heat because you refused to give up. I know you stayed when anyone sensible would have left. I know you're stubborn and bossy, and you argue with me constantly, and you've kept this place running better than I was managing before I got sick. He paused. And I know that having you here feels right in a way nothing else has in a long time. That's not love. No, but it's respect. And out here, that might matter more. Clara felt tears threatening and forced them back. If I say yes, Samuel wins. He gets to tell everyone he was right about me, that I was just looking for any man who'd take me. If you say yes, we both win, because we survive, because we keep fighting. Let Samuel think whatever he wants. He rode away from the best thing that ever showed up on his doorstep. That's on him. And what do you want, Ethan? Really? He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I want to not be alone anymore. I want someone who gives a damn if this place survives. I want a partner who'll argue with me when I'm being stupid and who'll work until they drop and who won't quit just because things get hard. And I want you to stay. Not out of obligation, not out of desperation, but because you want to. Clara felt something crack open in her chest. I'm broken, she said quietly. My leg will never be right. I'll always be slow. Always need help with certain things. You're tying yourself to someone who can't do half of what a ranch wife should be able to do. You're not broken. You're just different, and different isn't the same thing as less. The tears came then, hot and unwelcome. Clara wiped them away angrily. This is insane. Probably. We'll probably lose the ranch anyway. Probably. And you'll resent me for it. I doubt that. Clara laughed, though it came out choked. You're supposed to talk me out of this, not agree with me. I'm supposed to be honest. So here's honest. I don't know if we'll make it. I don't know if the drought will break, or if we'll find the cattle, or if the bank will give us enough time. I don't know if you'll hate being married to me, or if I'll hate being married to you. What I know is that I'd rather fight alongside you than alone. And I'd rather take my chances on something uncertain than watch you leave and spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been. Clara closed her eyes. She thought about the train platform in Salvation Creek, about Samuel Brennan riding away, about the look in her aunt's eyes when she'd said goodbye. She thought about walking 8 miles through the desert, about finding Ethan half dead on his floor, about the satisfaction of seeing the ranch come back to life under her care. She thought about belonging somewhere, about being needed instead of pitied, about partnership instead of charity. When she opened her eyes, Ethan was still watching her with that same steady gaze that never flinched away from her leg or her scars or her sharp edges. All right, she said. Let's get married. His face didn't change immediately. Then, slowly, the corner of his mouth lifted. Yeah? Yeah, but I have conditions. Name them. We split everything equally. I'm not some dependent wife who needs permission to exist. If I'm going to fight for this place, I'm fighting as an equal partner. Agreed. And if we lose it together. No martyring yourself to save me. No pushing me away because you think you're protecting me. We're in this together or not at all. Agreed. And if this doesn't work out, if we end up hating each other, or if the ranch fails and we have nothing left, we're honest about it. No pretending everything's fine when it's not. Agreed. He held out his hand. Anything else? Clara looked at his hand, scarred, calloused, the hand of someone who'd worked himself nearly to death trying to save something that mattered. Then she took it. Just one more thing, she said. We do this right. I'm not having people whisper that we snuck off to get married like we were ashamed. We do it in town, in front of everyone, so they can't say we're hiding something. Ethan's grip tightened on her hand. That's brave. Stupid, but brave. I'm tired of being afraid of what people think. Then we'll give them something to think about. They rode into Salvation Creek the next morning. both of them on horseback because Clara had insisted on learning to ride properly if she was going to be a rancher's wife, and Ethan had spent 2 hours the previous evening teaching her the basics on the gentle bay gelding. She wasn't graceful, and mounting required a step stool because her leg didn't bend the right way, but she stayed on, and that was what mattered. The town was just waking up when they arrived. Shopkeepers opening for business, people moving about their morning routines. Clara and Ethan rode straight to Judge Morrison's house. He'd mentioned at dinner weeks ago that he still had the authority to perform marriages, though he rarely used it. The judge answered his door in a dressing gown, looking surprised and not entirely pleased to be disturbed. "Ethan, Miss Whitmore, this is unexpected." "We need you to marry us," Ethan said simply. Morrison's eyebrows climbed. "Right now?" "Right now." "Well," the judge studied them both. "I assume you have good reasons for the urgency." "Samuel Brennan's forcing our hand," Clara said. "Figured we'd force his back." A slow smile spread across Morrison's face. "Come in. Give me 10 minutes to make myself presentable." He married them in his small sitting room with Ruth as witness. She'd been summoned from the boarding house and arrived flustered but determined. The ceremony was brief, perfunctory, nothing like what Clara had imagined as a girl. No flowers, no music, no family beaming from the pews, just 4 people in a dim room speaking words that would bind 2 lives together for better or worse. When Morrison pronounced them married, Ethan kissed her carefully, chastely, on the mouth. Clara tasted coffee and uncertainty and something that might have been hope. "Congratulations," Morrison said. "You're now legally bound to each other's fates. I hope you both know what you're doing." "We don't," Clara admitted, "but we're doing it anyway." Ruth hugged her fiercely. "You're either very brave or very stupid, probably both. Come by the boarding house later. I've got something for you." Then they walked out into the morning sun as husband and wife, and Clara felt the weight of it settle over her shoulders like a yoke, but not an unwelcome one. A yoke shared was lighter than one carried alone. Word spread through Salvation Creek like wildfire, just as they'd intended. By noon, everyone knew. Claire and Ethan made a point of walking through town together, heads high, letting people stare. They stopped at the general store where Carter greeted them with barely concealed surprise. "Heard congratulations are in order," he said carefully. "They are," Ethan replied. "My wife and I need supplies, and we'll be paying cash, so no need to worry about credit." Carter's eyes widened slightly at the word wife, but he took their money and filled their order without comment. They ran into the bank manager outside his office. Thomas Garrett looked deeply uncomfortable as Ethan approached him. "About that loan," Ethan said pleasantly. "I trust you'll be sending the official notice in writing. My wife will want to review the exact terms and timeline." "Your wife," Garrett repeated. "Clara Hale," Ethan said, and the way he said it, with pride and ownership and partnership all mixed together, made Clara's throat tight. "She's got a good head for figures, better than mine, honestly. She'll be handling the ranch books from now on." Garrett stammered something about sending the documents, then fled into his office. They saved Samuel for last. They found him outside the saloon, holding court with a few hangers-on. His face went pale when he saw them approaching together. "Samuel," Ethan said cordially, "wanted to thank you." "For what?" Samuel's voice was tight. "For bringing that concern about propriety to everyone's attention. You were absolutely right. Clara living at the ranch unwed was inappropriate. So we fixed it. Got married this morning. Judge Morrison performed the ceremony." The blood drained from Samuel's face. You married her?" "I did. Best decision I ever made, actually. So thanks for the push. We might not have thought of it otherwise." Clara stepped forward. "And Samuel? About that collection you mentioned, the one to send me back east? We don't need it, but I'm sure there are people in town who could use the help. Widows, families struggling with the drought. Maybe you could redirect your generosity in their direction." Samuel looked between them, his mouth opening and closing without sound. Finally he managed, "This is ridiculous. You barely know each other." "We know enough," Clara said. "We know we work well together. We know we respect each other. That's more than a lot of married couples can say." "You're making a mistake," Samuel said, but without conviction. "Maybe," Ethan agreed, but it's our mistake to make." They left him standing there, and Clara felt something like victory singing in her veins. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't romantic, but it was theirs, chosen, deliberate, honest. They picked up Ruth's gift from the boarding house, a quilt, beautiful and worn, that had belonged to Ruth's mother. "Every marriage needs something soft," Ruth said gruffly. "Even practical ones." Then they rode back to the ranch together as the sun started its decline toward the horizon. The land was still harsh, still drought-stricken, still uncertain, but somehow it looked different now, less like a sentence and more like a choice. When they got home, Clara started dinner while Ethan tended to the horses. They moved around each other with the easy familiarity of people who'd been working together for weeks. But now there was something else underneath, an awareness, a knowledge that they'd promised each other something permanent in a world where nothing felt permanent at all. They ate dinner mostly in silence, both exhausted from the day. When the dishes were clean and the fire banked, they stood awkwardly in the main room, suddenly aware that they were married and there were expectations and neither of them knew quite how to navigate this new terrain. "I can sleep out here," Ethan offered. "Like before. Nothing has to change." Clara looked at him. This man who'd accepted her partnership, who'd stood beside her against the town, who'd given her a legal right to stay when everyone wanted her gone. "Everything's already changed," she said quietly. "Might as well acknowledge it." They shared his bed that night, lying stiff and careful on opposite sides like there was an invisible line drawn down the middle. Clara stared at the ceiling in the dark and listened to Ethan breathe and wondered what she'd just committed herself to. But when she finally fell asleep, it was the deepest sleep she'd had since arriving in Arizona. Because for the first time in her life, Clara Whitmore, now Clara Hale, wasn't afraid of tomorrow. Whatever came next, she wouldn't be facing it alone. The loan payment was due in 5 weeks and they had $37. Clara sat at the kitchen table with Ethan's ledger spread in front of her, doing the math for the third time and getting the same impossible answer. The ranch owed the bank $218. They had $37. Even if they sold everything that wasn't nailed down, they'd still be $100 short. "There has to be something we're missing," she said, running her finger down the columns again. Ethan stood at the window, watching the sunrise paint the Badlands red. "There's not. I've been over those numbers 100 times. We need the cattle. That's the only way." They'd been searching for the scattered herd for 2 weeks now, riding out at dawn and coming back at dusk with nothing to show for it but exhaustion and frustration. The drought had driven the cattle into the roughest country, searching for water and grass that barely existed. Every day they found tracks, signs, evidence that the herd was out there somewhere. But the land was vast and unforgiving, and 2 people, one of them still learning to ride properly, couldn't cover enough ground. "We need help," Clara said. "Can't afford it. We can't afford not to have it. If we don't find those cattle in the next 3 weeks, we lose everything anyway. What's the point of saving $37 if the bank takes the ranch?" Ethan turned from the window. "Who would help us? Everyone in town thinks we're either crazy or scandalous. Samuel's made sure of that." "Not everyone." Clara closed the ledger. "Ruth would help, Judge Morrison might. And there have to be others, people who don't care about Samuel's gossip or who maybe got burned by him themselves." "Clara, what's the worst that happens? They say no, and we're exactly where we are right now, which is nowhere." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he grabbed his hat from the hook by the door. "All right, let's go ask for help." They rode into Salvation Creek mid-morning and went straight to Ruth's boarding house. She was out front sweeping the porch, and her face lit up when she saw them. "Well, look at you two. Married life making you soft? You both look exhausted." "We need help," Clara said, not bothering with pleasantries. "The cattle are scattered in the Badlands. We've been searching, but we can't cover enough ground. If we don't round them up and get them to market in the next 3 weeks, the bank forecloses." Ruth stopped sweeping. "How many had you looking for?" "Maybe 40, 50, enough to pay off the loan with a little left over." "That's a lot of ground to cover." Ruth leaned on her broom. "What are you offering?" "Honestly, nothing. We can't pay. All we can offer is that if we succeed, we won't forget who helped us." Ruth snorted. "That's the worst business proposition I've heard in 10 years. I'll do it. Give me an hour to close up here and find my riding gear. Haven't been on a horse in 5 years, but I guess it's like remembering how to be disappointed. Comes back easy." Clara felt her throat tighten. "Ruth, Don't get emotional on me. I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it because Samuel Brennan is an ass, and watching him lose would bring me more joy than I've had in years. But her eyes were soft when she said it. They found Judge Morrison at the saloon drinking coffee and reading a month-old newspaper. When they explained the situation, he folded the paper carefully and set it aside. I'm 73 years old, he said. My back hurts when it's going to rain, which means it always hurts because it never rains. My eyes aren't what they used to be, and I haven't rounded up cattle in probably 30 years. We understand, Ethan started, but Morrison held up a hand. I'm explaining why I'm a terrible choice, not why I won't help. When do we leave? By noon they had 6 people: Ruth, Judge Morrison, the 2 ranch hands who boarded with Ruth and were bored enough to risk Samuel's displeasure, and Doc Hartley, who admitted he'd been looking for an excuse to get out of his office. None of them were ideal. Most were too old or too inexperienced or too damaged by their own hard luck. But they were willing, and that counted for more than skill. Samuel found them gathering supplies at the general store. He stood in the doorway, blocking the light, his face twisted in something between disbelief and fury. "What is this?" he demanded. "A cattle drive," Ethan said calmly, not looking up from the supplies he was counting. "Or it will be, once we find them." With these people, an old man, a boarding house keeper, a drunk doctor, and 2 ranch hands who couldn't keep a job if their lives depended on it. "They're here," Clara said, "which is more than I can say for you." Samuel's jaw tightened. "You're wasting your time. That land ate those cattle. You'll never find them. And even if you do, you'll never round them up with this sorry group." "Maybe," Ethan agreed, "but we're going to try." "Why? So you can drag out the inevitable? So you can pretend a little longer that you haven't already lost?" Samuel stepped closer. "Face it, Ethan. Your father built something and you couldn't maintain it. Adding a crippled wife to the equation doesn't change that." Clara saw Ethan's hands curl into fists. She moved between them before he could do something stupid. "You're right about one thing," she said to Samuel. "We might fail. The cattle might be gone. The land might have taken them. But at least we'll fail trying. At least we'll know we fought for something instead of just riding away when it got uncomfortable." The reference to Samuel riding away from her on the train platform hung in the air between them. His face went dark red. "You think you're better than me? You're a woman nobody wanted, married to a man who's losing everything. In 6 months you'll be begging on the street and You'll what?" Ruth's voice cut across the store. She'd come in through the back door and now stood with her arms crossed. "You'll gloat? You'll feel superior? That's what you do, Samuel. You make yourself feel big by making others feel small. Your father would be ashamed." "Don't talk about my father." "Why not? He was a good man who built something real. You're just the son who's been coasting on his name while doing nothing of value yourself." Ruth moved forward until she was standing next to Clara. "These people are fighting for something. What are you fighting for? Your pride? Your reputation? Those are poor foundations, and they'll crumble just as fast as Ethan's ranch when the wind changes." Samuel looked around the store at the faces watching him. Carter behind the counter, the volunteers gathered near the door, townsfolk who'd drifted in to see the confrontation. For a moment, Clara almost felt sorry for him. He'd wanted to be the hero of this story, the righteous man running off the interloper. Instead, he was the villain, exposed and small. "You'll regret this," he said finally, but without much conviction. Then he pushed past them and out into the street. The store was silent for a moment. Then Carter cleared his throat. "Your supplies are ready, and I'm putting them on credit. Pay me when you can." "Carter," Ethan started, "my father knew your father. They built this town together. I haven't always made good choices about who to listen to, but I'm making one now." He pushed the supplies across the counter. "Find your cattle, save your ranch, then come back and tell Samuel Brennan to go to hell." They rode out that afternoon, 8 people on horseback heading into country that had killed better men than them. Clara still wasn't graceful on horseback, and her leg ached after an hour, but she'd learned to push through pain a long time ago. Ethan rode beside her, occasionally glancing over like he expected her to fall. "I'm fine," she said after the 3rd look. "Didn't say you weren't." "You didn't have to." They made camp that first night in a box canyon that offered some shelter from the wind. Ruth and Clara handled the cooking while the men set up bedrolls and tended the horses. It was simple food, beans and coffee, biscuits made from the supplies Carter had extended on credit, but it tasted better than it had any right to after a day in the saddle. Judge Morrison sat with his back against a rock, looking up at the stars. "Haven't done this in 30 years, he said to no one in particular. "Forgot how big the sky gets out here." "Big enough to get lost in," Ruth agreed. "Big enough to find yourself in too, maybe." The judge looked at Clara and Ethan. "You two doing all right? Can't be easy, all this." "Nothing's been easy since Clara got off that train," Ethan said. "But we're managing. That's all anyone can do out here. Manage. Survive. Maybe thrive if you're lucky and stubborn." Morrison took a sip of his coffee. "Your father would be proud, Ethan. Not because you're succeeding, hell, you're barely hanging on, but because you're fighting. That's what he did. Fought for every inch of this place until the day he died." "Fought and lost," Ethan said quietly. "Did he? He built a ranch, raised a son, lived a life on his own terms in a place that tried to kill him every day. That doesn't sound like losing to me." They found the first cattle the next day, 5 head in a shallow ravine, clustered around a seep spring that was more mud than water. It took 3 hours to drive them back to a holding area they'd established near camp. 5 cattle out of maybe 50. It wasn't much, but it was something. The second day brought 8 more, scattered across a plateau. The third day, nothing but tracks and frustration. The fourth day, they found 12 head, but lost 3 in the process when they spooked and ran into country too rough to follow. Clara kept count in her journal every night. 5, 8, 12, minus 3. 22 cattle. They needed at least 40 to have a chance at paying off the loan. 28 still out there somewhere, and time running out. On the 5th day, Clara's horse stepped in a hole and went down. She hit the ground hard, felt something in her bad leg twist wrong, and for a moment she couldn't breathe from the pain. When she could finally suck in air, Ethan was there, white-faced, pulling her away from the horse's hooves. "Clara, talk to me. What hurts?" "Everything," she managed, "especially my pride." The horse was fine, more startled than injured. Clara was less fine. Her leg had swollen by evening, and she couldn't put weight on it without seeing stars. Doc Hartley wrapped it tight and gave her whiskey for the pain. "You need to rest it," he said. "No riding for at least 2 days." "We don't have 2 days." "Then you'll do permanent damage. Your choice." Ethan wanted to take her back to the ranch. Clara refused. They compromised. She'd stay at the camp while the others searched. She hated it, hated being useless, but she couldn't argue with the fact that she'd slow them down in her current state. So she stayed behind, tending the fire and the gathered cattle, while the others ranged farther into the Badlands. Ruth stayed with her on the 2nd day, claiming she needed a break from riding. "You don't," Clara said. "You're staying because Ethan asked you to make sure I don't do anything stupid." Ruth poured them both coffee. "Maybe. Or maybe I'm staying because I'm old and tired and my ass hurts. Take your pick." They sat in companionable silence for a while. Then Ruth said, "You love him yet?" Clara nearly choked on her coffee. "What?" "Ethan, you love him yet, or is this still just a practical arrangement?" We barely know each other." "That's not an answer." Clara stared into her coffee cup. "I don't know. How do you know if you love someone or if you just respect them and work well with them and are terrified of losing them?" "Sounds like love to me." "It's too soon. We got married out of desperation." Every marriage starts somewhere. Some start with romance and flowers and fade into nothing. Some start with desperation and grow into something real. Ruth shifted to get more comfortable on the rock she was using as a seat. "You asked me what I think? I think you two found each other at the exact right time. Any earlier and it wouldn't have worked. Any later and you'd have both been too broken. But right then, on that platform, in that moment, that was when you needed each other. And you still do." "What if we lose the ranch?" "Then you lose it. But you'll still have each other. That's worth something." Clara wanted to believe that, but every time she closed her eyes, she saw the numbers in the ledger. $37, $218 owed. The gap between surviving and losing everything. The others returned at sunset with 17 more cattle. 39 total. So close. Just one more head, and they'd have enough to make the payment work if the market was good. But they'd been searching for 5 days and covered most of the accessible territory. Wherever the last cattle were, they weren't going to be easy to find. "We have to go deeper," Ethan said that night, studying a rough map he'd drawn in the dirt. "There's a valley about 10 miles north, rough country, hard to access. But there's water there, or used to be. If any cattle survived, that's where they'd be. That's 2 days round trip, Judge Morrison said, and we're running out of supplies. Then we go fast. Leave at first light, push hard, and hope we find them before dark. If we're not back by tomorrow night, we missed them. And if we did, Ruth asked, if there's nothing there, then we come back with what we have and pray it's enough. They left before dawn, everyone except Clara and Doc Hartley, who stayed to watch the gathered herd. Clara hated being left behind, but she couldn't argue with the fact that her legs still wouldn't support a hard ride, so she watched them disappear into the gray pre-dawn light and tried not to think about everything that could go wrong. The day passed slowly. Clara kept herself busy checking the cattle, making sure none slipped away, tending the fire. Doc Hartley entertained her with stories from his days as a real doctor back east, before the drinking got bad and he'd fled to the frontier where standards were lower. You ever regret it? Clara asked. Coming out here? Every day. But I regret what I left behind more, so it balances out. He took a swig from his flask. You'll regret things too, probably. Everyone does. The trick is making sure you've got good things to balance the regret. Things you built. People you love. Moments that mattered. Is that what you have? Not really, but I'm working on it. The sun was setting when they heard hoofbeats. Clara's heart jumped. Too early for the others to be back, which meant either something had gone wrong or they'd found the cattle faster than expected. 8 riders emerged from the scrub, and behind them, scattered but moving, at least 15 head of cattle. Clara stood up so fast she nearly fell over. Ethan dismounted and was at her side in seconds, supporting her weight. We found them, he said, and his voice was rough with exhaustion and something that might have been tears. There was a valley, just like I thought, still had water. The cattle were there, all of them. Took us all day to round them up, but we got them. Clara did the math in her head. 39 plus 15. 54 head total. More than enough. More than they dared hope for. We did it, she whispered. We did it, Ethan agreed. They drove the cattle to market the next morning, all 8 riders plus the herd, moving slow but steady. It took 2 days to reach the railhead town where the cattle buyers operated. 2 days of dust and exhaustion and cattle that tried to wander at every opportunity. But they made it. The buyer was a hard man who'd seen 1,000 desperate ranchers and knew how to exploit them. He looked over the herd with a practiced eye and made an offer that was insulting. Clara stepped forward before Ethan could respond. That's half what they're worth. The buyer shrugged. Market's soft. Drought's got everyone selling. I can get cattle anywhere. Then go get them. But you won't get healthier stock than this. These cattle found water and survived when others died. That's breeding worth paying for. You his wife? I am. Then let your husband negotiate. He is, through me. Clara crossed her arms. We both know what these cattle are worth. You're trying to take advantage because you think we're desperate. And we are. But not desperate enough to get robbed. Pay us fairly, or we'll drive them to the next town. The buyer studied her for a long moment. Then he smiled, just slightly. All right, I respect that. Here's my real offer. He named a price that was still low but workable. Clara looked at Ethan. He nodded. Deal, she said. They got $243 for the herd. After paying back the money they'd borrowed for supplies, they had $226, $8 more than the loan payment, $8 between losing everything and survival. They rode back to Salvation Creek with the money in Ethan's saddlebag, barely speaking because they were too exhausted for words. When they reached town, they went straight to the bank. Thomas Garrett looked surprised to see them. Mr. Hale. Mrs. Hale. I wasn't expecting... We're here to pay the loan, Ethan said, pulling out the money. Garrett's eyes widened. You found the cattle? We found them. Here's $218. Counts it if you want. Garrett counted it slowly, like he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. When he finished, he looked up with something that might have been respect. This pays off the loan in full. You're current with the bank, Mr. Hale. Congratulations. Clara felt something unclench in her chest. They'd done it. Against every odd, every obstacle, every person who said they'd fail, they'd done it. They walked out of the bank into bright afternoon sunlight. Ruth and the others were waiting across the street, trying to look casual and failing. When they saw Ethan and Clara's faces, a cheer went up. "You did it," Ruth said, hugging Clara hard enough to hurt. "You actually did it." "We did it," Clara corrected. "All of us." Judge Morrison bought them all dinner at the saloon, a celebration that turned rowdy and went late into the night. Clara sat next to Ethan, their hands intertwined under the table, and watched the people who'd helped them laugh and drink and celebrate something that mattered. Samuel Brennan showed up around midnight, probably drawn by the noise. He stood in the doorway, watching them with an expression Clara couldn't quite read. Then he turned and left without saying a word. "Should feel good," Ethan said quietly, proving him wrong. "Does it?" "Not really. Mostly just feels like we survived. Like we got lucky." "It wasn't luck. It was work. And stubbornness. And people who gave a damn." "Yeah." Ethan squeezed her hand. "Yeah, it was." They rode back to the ranch the next day, just the two of them. The land looked the same, harsh, unforgiving, drought-stricken, but somehow it felt different, like it was theirs now in a way it hadn't been before, like they'd earned it through blood and sweat and sheer refusal to quit. That night, Clara sat at the kitchen table with the ledgers open in front of her, $8 left after the loan payment. It wasn't much, barely enough for a week's supplies, but it was more than the 37 they'd started with, and they'd survived. Ethan came up behind her and put his hands on her shoulders. "What are you thinking?" "That we're still broke, that the drought hasn't ended, that we used up all our luck and next time we might not make it." "Probably true, but we made it this time." "We did." Clara closed the ledger and turned to look at him. Really look at him, this man who'd become her husband out of desperation and necessity, who'd fought beside her, who'd trusted her when she'd had nothing to offer but stubbornness and a refusal to quit. "I love you," she said, and the words came out easier than she'd expected. "I don't know when it happened. Maybe when you defended me at that town meeting. Maybe when you stood beside me at the cattle buyer and let me negotiate. Maybe it was earlier, when you were delirious with fever and told me the fence could wait. But I love you, and I needed you to know that." Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he pulled her up from the chair and kissed her properly. Not the careful, chaste kiss from their wedding, but something deeper and real and full of promise. "I love you too," he said when they broke apart. "Probably fell for you when you dumped cold water on me and told me to drink. Or maybe when you climbed into that loft to throw down hay even though you could barely walk. Or maybe it was when you stood up to Samuel and refused to be ashamed of existing." He smiled. "Doesn't really matter when. Just matters that I do." They went to bed that night, their bed, not divided by invisible lines anymore, and Clara felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace, not happiness, exactly. Not contentment, just peace. The knowledge that she was exactly where she was supposed to be, with exactly who she was supposed to be with. The drought didn't break that year, or the next. It took 3 years before the rains came back for real, before the land stopped looking like it wanted to kill everything on it. 3 years of scraping by, of making $8 stretch into 10, of working dawn to dusk and falling into bed exhausted. But they made it, together. Clara learned to ride properly, though her leg never let her be graceful about it. She learned to rope cattle, fix fences, doctor sick animals. She learned 100 things she'd never imagined needing to know. And she taught Ethan things too, how to keep proper books, how to negotiate with buyers who thought they could cheat him, how to see value in things beyond immediate profit. Ruth came out to the ranch once a month, always claiming it was just to check on them, but really because she'd become something like family. Judge Morrison visited too, bringing news from town and legal advice they didn't always want but usually needed. Doc Hartley sobered up, mostly, and started actually practicing medicine instead of just drinking away his regrets. Samuel Brennan left Salvation Creek 2 years after the loan payment, sold his ranch for less than it was worth, and moved back east, chasing whatever dignity he thought he'd lost. Some people said he'd been broken by watching Clara and Ethan succeed. Others said he'd finally realized he was building on sand. Clara thought it was probably both. The town slowly changed its mind about her. It happened in small ways. A nod from Carter when she came in for supplies, an invitation to a barn raising, a request for her help with someone's books because word had gotten around that she was good with numbers. She'd never be one of them completely, But she'd earned enough respect that they stopped seeing her as a scandal and started seeing her as someone who belonged. 5 years after stepping off that train, Clara stood on the ridge behind the ranch house and watched the sunset paint the Badlands gold and red. Ethan came up behind her, slipping an arm around her waist. Beautiful, isn't it? It's harsh, Clara corrected. Unforgiving, trying to kill us every single day. And beautiful. And beautiful, she agreed. Down in the valley, their cattle grazed on grass that had finally come back with the rains. The ranch was still small, still struggling, still one bad year away from disaster. But it was theirs, built through stubbornness and sweat, and a refusal to let the land or the people or the circumstances win. You ever regret it? Ethan asked. Getting off that train? Choosing this? Clara thought about it. She thought about the platform in Salvation Creek, about Samuel Brennan riding away, about walking 8 miles through the desert heat. She thought about finding Ethan half dead, about fighting infection and drought and poverty and prejudice. She thought about every hard day, every moment of doubt, every time she'd wondered if they'd made a terrible mistake. No, she said finally, I don't regret it. Not even the hard parts? Especially not the hard parts. The hard parts are what made it matter. Ethan pulled her closer. You're an odd woman, Clara Hale. And you're stuck with me. Best thing that ever happened to me, getting stuck with you. They stood there as the sun dropped below the horizon and the stars began to emerge. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of sage and dust. The land stretched out around them, vast, harsh, beautiful, unforgiving. Clara had come to Arizona territory looking for mercy. For someone to see past her scars and give her a chance she hadn't earned. What she'd found instead was harder and better. A place that demanded everything from her and gave nothing for free. A man who saw her strength instead of her weakness. A life built on honest work and mutual respect instead of charity or pity. She'd been left standing on a platform with nothing but determination and $8. Now she stood on a ridge with a home, a husband, a future that was uncertain, but hers. The woman who'd stepped off that train wouldn't have recognized her. That woman had been desperate, frightened, ready to accept whatever scraps the world offered. This woman, standing in the wind with dust in her hair and calluses on her hands, and a man she loved beside her. This woman had learned that sometimes the best things in life weren't given. They were taken, fought for, earned. Clara Whitmore had arrived in Salvation Creek broken and afraid, believing she needed someone to save her. Clara Hale knew better. She'd saved herself. And in the process, she'd helped save someone else. That was worth more than all the mercy in the world. Come on, Ethan said, tugging her hand. It's getting cold. Let's go home. Home. The word settled in Clara's chest like something warm and permanent. Not the boarding house where she'd spent 3 desperate days. Not the train car that had brought her west. Not even the ranch house exactly, though that was part of it. Home was this. The choice to stay when leaving would have been easier. The decision to fight when giving up made more sense. The partnership built on honest need and mutual respect. The love that had grown from desperation into something real and lasting. Home was the place where she was needed, where she belonged, where her scars were just part of who she was instead of all she'd ever be. They walked back to the house together as darkness fell, and Clara didn't limp. Her leg would never be right. She'd carry that fever's legacy until the day she died. But somewhere between that train platform and this moment, it had stopped defining her. She was more than her limitations now, more than the woman someone hadn't wanted. She was Clara Hale, ranch wife, partner, survivor, fighter, and she wasn't going anywhere. The door closed behind them, shutting out the wind and the darkness. Inside, the house was warm from the fire Ethan had built earlier. Simple, spare, nothing fancy. But theirs. Clara hung up her hat and started making dinner while Ethan checked the supply of firewood. They moved around each other with the easy comfort of 2 people who'd learned to work together, who'd earned their place in each other's lives through 1,000 small choices and one big gamble that had somehow paid off. Outside, the Arizona desert settled into night, harsh, beautiful, unforgiving as ever. But inside, there was warmth and light and the quiet satisfaction of having survived another day. That was enough. It would always be enough. Sonnet 4.5. Claude is AI and can make